Hi folks, Josh Knight the First here with another episode of Writer Rebuild, coming to you with episode 37 of the series. Let's get right into it. So this week on Kamen Rider Build, we're still seeing the progression of the threat that is Evolt, and we see that now there's starting to be a little bit of cracks in his armor, even though the cracks in the armor are usually more of Rogue's thing, but that's a design thing. No, really what we're seeing here is that Evolt is actually starting to be affected by the continual attempts of the build team to go ahead and thwart him. Now we do see that Evolt did possess Sento at the end of last episode, and that's given him access to this third phase form, but he also gives Sento a little bit of information before we actually got that we didn't really cover last episode, which was the whole idea of necessity being the mother of invention. In the case of the series, Sento was the person who found it necessary to promote the creation and eventual evolution of the Rider system, and that would eventually lead to exactly what Evolt wanted, for the stronger forms that he wanted to achieve again. Now, necessity being the mother of invention is an old phrase that's been around for ages, but we see here that Evolt was able to use that and twist it around to get Sento to do his bidding again. See, this goes back all the way to the beginning of the series when we see that Sento this whole time hasn't had a chance to do things for himself. He's been playing into Evolt's plan this whole time, and now he's playing it on a very personal level since he's been possessed. Now, as a result of the body swapping that we saw last episode, we see that Ryuga is free of his control and is free to fight back, but unfortunately, because all of the DNA that was part of Evolt has left him and is now residing within Sento, Ryuga now no longer has the ability to fight. This is very much like last year with Kamen Rider Exade, whereas Emu couldn't transform into Exade without Palad being beside him or within him. Kind of the same case here. Now we're going to be seeing bits and pieces of this throughout the episode, but we see that all of the efforts of the Kamen Riders to thwart Evolt's plans are actually starting to get to him. He's actually starting to lose his cool. Now it's said that in an argument, in a conflict, the person to lose their cool first is usually the person who loses. And in this particular case, it looks like it's going to be Evolt, because the Kamen Riders are having something deeper drive them, which is actually a big part of this episode, the concept of fighting for love and peace. Now I admit, I thought this was interesting when it was first brought up in the series that this is the thing that Sento was fighting for the concepts of love and peace, but it seems now in his stead, since he can't really fight in this episode, it's up to Kazumi, Ryuga, and everybody else to go ahead and pick up where he left off, and it seems that that's really something that they can all see is worth fighting for. Even though Ryuga can't transform, and even though he goes to Gentoku to see if there's any way that they can fix that, he still believes that this is worth fighting for, and Kazumi tells everybody on a basic level that's what we've been doing this whole time, and eventually Gentoku adopts this. Now, for good reason, Gentoku doesn't quite see this. He still blames himself for his father's death, and actually talks to Ryuga about still being to blame for the death of his girlfriend earlier on at the beginning of the series. He admits to Ryuga that up till now he was fighting for the sake of trying to reunite the country, but now he's not so sure about that since his faith in that concept has been shaken. Of course, this is all due to Evolt's interference. Now, at this point, we see that Gentoku as a character is still growing, and we see that arc of him going from bad guy to anti-hero, maybe all the way to hero by the end of this episode. Now, while all the Kamen Riders are working on their motivations as to why they're doing all this, it's still up to Vernage to go ahead and protect Pandora's box, since obviously Evolt is going to be making a move for that, since Nanba's still asking for it. Now, what's interesting to me is that Vernage moved Pandora's box. Now, she didn't teleport, which we see that she does have the capability of doing. She can teleport people and matter. Here, she seems to have physically moved the cafe to a sunny location by the beach. Why she did that, I don't know, maybe she just likes water. But aside from that, that's all we're actually going to see out of Vernage and Misora this episode, which I get. For the last two episodes, they've been really draining emotionally and probably powerfully as well, so I think it's okay for one episode if she sits this out. Now, having mentioned Nanba, we still see that all he seems to want is Pandora's box, and he's so fixated on it, he's willing to accept any story that Evolt is telling him, and this has been going on for several episodes. The interesting thing about this episode is that he seems to have found out everything about who Evolt is, and all of the plot dump that we were given last episode. My question is, how exactly did he find out about all of this information? Now, it could have been that Utsumi had a bug on him, or he related back to him, but otherwise I just don't get how he got that information. It's important that he has it, but then it's kind of undone that he doesn't really care about that information when he really should. Now, when we get to the main fighting portions of this episode, we see that the whole motive that Evolt has now is to actually punish Sento for pushing him so far and then not getting far enough to activate the Evolt trigger, telling telling him that he's purposely going to focus on destroying everything and everyone that he loves. This actually lines up quite a bit with Sento's plan back from Heisei Generation's final, in that he pushed the evolution of the bad guy in that movie by Kaiser so that he thought he had the advantage but didn't have the full power that he needed. So it's interesting that that plan's actually carrying over with that same character. Now during this last portion, we actually see the Hell Brothers again, who are kind of the chaperones to Evolt as he's there trying to get Pandora's box back. Now there's really not much for them to do, and I imagine they are going to die very soon since they're not serving any sort of purpose. They don't even have lines in this episode. And again, it's nice to see that during these fights, one, I very much appreciate that Grease is using that interesting fighting style that he's been utilizing since his introduction into the series, but also that he's still using the Hokuto Trio bottles to give him that extra boost, not just in power, but in motivation. Now beyond that, we actually do see Rogue join into the fray and decide, you know what, if I'm not the person who's going to lead this country on, I can at least make a path for the person who will do that. Now I imagine he must have somebody in mind for that, or he's just wishfully thinking that eventually somebody will come along who can do what he can't. Now during this fight, Evolt does use two of the forms that we've seen him using with the Cobra bottle and the Rabbit bottle. Now up to this point, Ryuga's just been having to sit on the sidelines and not really be able to do much of anything, but he resorts back to an old idea that really comes across very easily for a character like him. I should just punch things to see if I can make them better. That concept has defined him as a character from his introduction and when he was first given the Dragon Bottle at the beginning of the series. The whole idea that if there's something standing in my way, I'm just gonna punch my way through it. That, in this certain case, it's very sort of shonen manga-esque as far as motivation for a character, but it works for him, and here it's something that's very necessary. I actually liken it to something I saw in Doctor Who this past season or so, when the Doctor was having to punch through a diamond mountain. Really, the amount of punches doesn't really matter, it's the amount of motivation that will make you keep doing those punches to try and get through the immovable object, which in this case is Evolt. Now for some reason, we're not sure of the specifics of this, but we do know that Ryuga stole the Dragon Evolt bottle off of Evolt and was able to use that to somehow turn it into what is now being called the Great Dragon Evolt bottle. We see the color change, and now Ryuga somehow has the ability to transform again. But he's not transforming into the form that we know, Cross. He's now being called Great Cross, which is the cross suit with some red coloring on it. Now, people have been talking about this since the episode came out and asking, well, is this his new final form? No, it's not. It's now a upgraded base form. Now, we've seen stuff like this in Kamen Rider before. If you go all the way back to the beginning of the series, the colors that the Kamen Riders had at the beginning, blue and green, switching over to silver and red for the gloves and boots of the main two riders, that was just something we came to accept. The more appropriate comparison that we can pull is actually from episode 28 of Sky Rider, or Kamen Rider as it was known at the time. During episode 28, Sky Rider went into training with the first 7 riders, and during that time the coloring on his costume changed from the dingy brown to the bright orange and green that we know today. Now of course back then there wasn't any such thing as a final form, so it was just accepted that this was the new norm, which is going to be the case here for Great Cross. Now since this is a base form, this is why he can still transform into Cross Magma. Now that the 3 riders are united and doing a pretty good triple rider kick, unfortunately this is exactly what Evolt was waiting for, so that he could absorb that power into the Evolt trigger and activate it to give him his final form, Black Hole. Now we'll probably see more of it in next week's episode, but I've got to admit, one, this is kind of quick for giving him a form that's very similar, almost just a basic repaint to his base form, but I gotta say I kind of like the black and white color scheme better than the red, blue, and gold. Something about the look of it, the way the white looks and just the little red line there, it just looks a little bit more threatening. The other form, I like it, but it's still kind of busy. Here, this is exactly getting across to him, no, it's a base thing, you're probably going to die if you're going to face it. Now somehow in the process of him gaining Black Hole, this allows Evolt to eject Sento from his body, so we're not worrying about Sento anymore, because Sento's not home right now, it's actually Katsuragi. We see that when Ryuga tries to wake him up, Sento doesn't know that he's Sento. He remembers that he was Katsuragi and seems to have no information about what's happened up till now. This will lead us into next week's episode where we see that we're getting a new rider and things aren't looking so good for Katsuragi, or Isurugi for that matter, since it seems that he's kinda gonna get repossessed. Overall in this episode, I very much like the promotion of the concept of fighting for love and peace as a foundation not just for a country, but for the people that are using it. Throughout the series, we see that Evolt is actually relying on people resorting to their worst instincts, trying to be nasty to each other, to be aggressive, which is everything that came out of Pandora's box, much like the myth that they based the name off. But here, with our heroes fighting for love and peace, it actually promotes something of a higher ideal. The fact that you don't have to give in to your based instincts, you can actually get over them, you can get along with people, and you can unite around that concept. And at the end of the day, that's what a Kamen Rider is supposed to be. They're supposed to fight for that ideals when other people can't do it for themselves. And since they may have been victims of that cruelty, of that rage that other people might want to see in other people, it's up to them to accept, no, I could give over to that, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take what happened to me and make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else. That's what makes a Kamen Rider, and that's what I think makes the Kamen Riders in this series very much worth watching. But those, of course, are my thoughts on the episode. I want to hear what you guys thought about this episode in the comments below, so let's go ahead and talk about a few things. First off, Evolt. Just what do you think will actually cause his downfall at the end of the series? Will it be an upgrade or actually his own rage? Secondly, Gentoku. Since he says he's not the person to go ahead and lead the country, who do you think should be the person that should take up that banner and lead Japan? And thirdly, in regards to the upgrades, what do you actually prefer based off this series or other series that you've seen? Do you prefer the upgrades to come through training or just through power-up items? You tell me in the comments below. And of course, during the week, you can always talk to me over on social media. On Twitter, I'm at JoshKnight1st. This has been episode 37 of Rider Rebuild for episode 37 of Kamen Rider Build, the ultimate phase. I'm Josh Knight the First, and I'll see you guys again next episode.